just a few more moments in case folks are running a little behind. We'll get started here in a few. Let's go ahead and get rolling. So, hi everyone. My name is Nathan Smith, and I'm the Digital Literacy Specialist for the Central Arkansas Library System. We are doing a lot of great live virtual events across the system since it's not very safe to do in-person events at this point. So if you want to check those out, there's a super duper easy way to do that. All you need to do is head to cals.live. Just type cals.live into your web browser, and that'll get you there. So feel free. Another thing, of course, to mention is, well, just a couple of little pieces of setup here that I always like to do at the beginning of class. First of all, I always like to encourage folks to ask questions throughout my classes. The point of technology classes is for you as an attendee to learn something. And so if there's something that's unclear, or if there's sort of a question that's lingering in the back of your mind, that is a block, kind of a distraction that will keep you from actually getting the most out of the class that you can. So if you do have questions, just please let me know anytime. The easiest way to do that is down at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you're on a computer, you'll see a little speech bubble. That's the chat button. Click on that chat button and type whatever questions you have into the chat. Excuse me, and that's a good way to get those questions to me. If you're watching on a mobile device, you can tap on. You might have to tap on, in the middle of Zoom somewhere, and you may even have to tap on a little more button at the bottom or the top of the screen in order to see the chat option there. So regardless of what device you're using, make sure that you send those questions in whenever you have them. And a couple of times throughout the class, I'll also just pause to give folks time to ask questions. I am watching the Zoom chat, and I am watching the live chat on YouTube as well. So I should be able to pick up whatever questions y'all have when you have them. The other big thing is technical difficulties. If you find that there are some technical difficulties, if you can't hear me, sometimes I find, unfortunately, Zoom is not super great at letting me know when my microphone is causing problems, and so that I can fix them in a timely manner. If that happens during this session, please, again, let me know through the chat. That's the best way to make that happen. Oh my goodness. Okay, so give me just a moment. Let me put the green screen back up behind me, and then we'll get rolling. I'll be right back. Mm-hmm. Speaking of technical difficulties, right? Okay, let's try that again. Also speaking of technical difficulties, I noticed that Zoom is making me extremely yellow today for some reason. Not sure why that is. Don't have time to spend a long time fiddling with the with my lighting setup, so we're just going to leave it for now. Just know that I have eaten less carrots than it appears I have. Okay, so I think that's it. Let's get going. This is the first time I've done this class, so hopefully everything's going to go smoothly, and hopefully y'all will learn a lot. I think it's pretty cool what we're going to be talking about. So I'm excited to get that rolling. Okay, so let me turn my screen sharing on. There you are, After Effects. Okay, cool. So I pulled up Adobe After Effects. I already had it open, so you might not see exactly this screen. If you do, then that's totally fine. All you'll need to do is if you don't see this screen, that's totally fine. Over on the left-hand side of the screen that pops up when you first open After Effects, if you aren't in a project, you'll just want to click New Project on the left-hand side, and that'll get you to basically here. So let's talk for a moment about After Effects, what it does, and how it's useful, and we'll talk about what we're going to be digging into here in the class. and then we'll dive in and test out the waters a little bit. Okay, so Adobe After Effects is a tool for visual effects, compositing, and motion graphics. Basically, so visual effects are things that you'll use for are essentially they're the computerized version of what they used to call special effects in the movie business back in the day. It's things like, making it look like someone is, making it look like someone is in an environment that they're not actually in, or adding a little, like changing the landscape around them, or adding a little, changing their face so that they look, they don't exactly look, like they do in real life, or any number of those things. So that's visual effects. When I say motion graphics, what I'm talking about is things like text that appears on the screen and flies in and flies out, or any sort of like animation like that. And compositing is basically taking multiple pieces of, multiple images, or in this case, usually footage and an image, or two pieces of footage or whatever, and combining them into one thing. So After Effects does a lot of those things. Almost anything that is a little more graphically intensive that you can't do when you're editing in Adobe Premiere, you can usually do in After Effects. It's definitely a very useful tool. And so I'm excited for y'all to learn about it. We're going to do 3 examples today that'll give you a feel for how to get around After Effects in general. And so, basically, those are going to be the first one. We're going to do some text animation. The second one, we're going to do what's called tracking. We'll talk about that when we get there, but it's a pretty cool technique to have in your arsenal. And then we're going to do a green screen composite at the end. So that's not the full extent, of course, of what you can do with After Effects, but this will give you a feel for how most of the parts of it work, so that you can really dig in on it and learn more on your own and get some practice. All right, so first things, okay, so we're going to do the text. First things first, here in the middle, there are 2 different options: new composition and new composition from footage. Let's go ahead and click new composition from footage. I'll click on that. And then it's going to give me my little, file import pop-up window right here, so that I can choose what I want to use, or which, so that I can choose which footage I need for my first composite here, or my first composition, I should say. What I did, I took the example files and I put them on my desktop. You may have put them somewhere different. If so, just find them. And what we're looking for in this situation is the backgrounds folder right here. There are 6 different pieces of background footage. All of them are, the only thing that's different is the visuals. I actually put the same audio under every single one. So the only difference is the visual that you see. This time I'm going to choose the trees. So I'll double click on trees.mp4 there. And that gives me this situation right here. I've got, so let's talk about the layout just a little bit, and we'll dig into it more as we go along. So the There we go. Okay, yeah, for some reason it seemed to be giving me an audio error there. Okay. Okay, good. All right, so over here we've got the project panel. The project panel is going to show you all the bits, all the things that are in your project file that you are working in After Effects. A project file can have a bunch of different things. The idea with a project file is basically if you're working on something that, if you're working on a particular piece of video or a particular set of clips, things like that. Let's say you're making a YouTube video and you need to do, and there are 5 shots where you need something done in After Effects. You can do all of that in one project file, and then you don't have to worry about copying things over from one project file to another, particularly if they're like shared bits of things, like you're doing you're reusing the same graphic over and over, or you want things to just kind of work in a similar way. In all those types of situations, you're going to be doing or it'll be easier to do it all inside of one project file rather than creating a project file every time you want to work with a different shot. So we're going to stick inside a single project file here, and that'll just make things easier for us, basically. So the project panel is going to show you all of the pieces of media, all of the assets is what we would say, inside of our project file. So we have 2 assets right now, trees.mp4, which is our actual video file, the video file that was included in the example files that perhaps you've downloaded from my in my little packet of example files. And then this trees right here with a little kind of looks like a film cell with little blue and red circles on it. That's a composition. So a composition is a single piece that you're working with in After Effects that contains animations and video, perhaps audio, all kinds of things. So so we'll be creating, for our 3 examples, we'll be creating 3 compositions, 1 composition per example. So that's over here on the left, the project panel. And if you need additional things inside your project, you can always drag them in. You can even open up a little file explorer window and just drag and drop stuff in there. Or you can, you can right click and go to import and find stuff, or whatever. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. Basically, anytime you add something to a composition or to your project, it shows up in here. Okay, so next thing, we've got our preview panel right here. The preview panel basically just shows us how our composition is shaping up so far, what it's looking like. It gives us the opportunity to watch it play back and see, see if it's looking good, that sort of thing. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got a few different sections here. Up at the very top right, those of you who are watching on YouTube won't be able to see this part actually. So let me just turn my camera off for a second, then that'll get me out of the way for a moment. Okay, so up here in the top right is this info panel, and it does a few different things. It'll show you stats about playback, so it'll show you how fast your video is playing back, whether it's playing in real time or not. Also, if you mouse over any part of your composition, it'll also tell you exactly what color the pixel that's under your pointer is. So I can see this particular green color is 50 green, 53, or excuse me, 50 red, 53 green, 25 blue, and 255 in the alpha channel. The alpha channel is how transparent something is. So we'll talk about that a a lot more when we get to our green screen example. But 255 means this particular pixel is completely opaque. If there's another pixel behind that in my composition, my audience won't be able to see it at all because this is completely opaque. If that alpha channel is down to 0, then my audience won't be able to see that pixel at all. They'll only see stuff that's behind it if there's anything there. If not, they'll just see the background color of the composition. Oh, and it'll show you where your cursor is positioned in the comp. So I'm at 1076x and 544y. That's where that's the location where I am currently. If I go all the way up to the very top corner, if I really wanted to get fiddly with it, I could go to 0, 0, which is left corner of it. X is horizontal, Y is vertical. Underneath that, I have my effects and presets, and I can click down here to search through my effects and presets and kind of find effects or presets that I want to apply. There's a lot of stuff going on here. We'll use this plenty. And then down here is one more panel. Yours may not be the exact same thing that mine is. To be honest, I'm not sure what the default is down here. But I have a lot of things open, and we can kind of deal with those as they come, or it might be blank. But if you don't have anything down here, if it's something different than what I'm seeing, don't worry about it. We'll get there. Finally, over here at the bottom left is really the heart of After Effects, and that's the timeline. The timeline in After Effects is super duper important because we have to know exactly when things are happening. And when you're animating, which is a lot of what we're doing in After Effects, you're really going to be, it's going to be super important what happens when. So the timeline shows you that and allows you to tweak those things. Right now in our timeline, we only have one layer. There are going to be a lot of layers here in the future. For now, we only have one layer, and that's this video clip that we imported, trees.mp4. You may see something different here. The way I have my settings, there's this drop down that says normal. There's a checkbox that says T that's not checked, and so on and so forth. If you don't see that, that's actually better. That's kind of how I normally have it. I'm going to click this button down here that says toggle switches and modes, and that's going to give us all these little boxes that I can check to do various things. We're not going to deal with this a whole lot, but there are multiple pieces of functionality that you can kind of turn on and off for each layer with these little boxes. Okay, so we've got our footage. Now let's add some text on top of it to, and then, and a shape. And we're gonna animate that stuff a little bit. Okay, first things first. Let's add a shape to kind of separate our trees here from the. Well, let's just watch it for a sec. I'm going to hit spacebar on my keyboard. As long as I have either this preview panel up here or the timeline panel down here highlighted. So if I click in one, it's going to show me this. It's going to have this blue outline around it. As long as I have one of those panels selected when I hit spacebar, it should play the video for me. You'll notice there's a little green bar here. It's growing out and out. It's super duper important. What this is this is your preview. This basically shows you which frames of your preview are ready for viewing and which ones aren't. When I say frames, whenever we're talking video or film, frames are the individual still images that are flashed up on your screen that give your audience the illusion of movement. So, a normal frame rate for video, is going to be, if you're if you're shooting just standard plain old video, most of the time, the standard frame rate is 30 frames per second. That's what we use in American TV. And that's kind of just a standard run-of-the-mill, kind of your default format overall. Films like that are shown in theaters usually have a slightly lower frame rate. Rather than 30 frames per second, films usually run at around 24 frames per second. So if you want to shoot something in a way that looks a little bit more cinematic, then you can shoot it in 24 frames per second rather than 30, and that's going to give you that more movie-like feel. Video games, the baseline for video games tends to be about 60 frames per second. The reason you want more frames per second is so that motion looks smoother. So that way it's easier to tell what's going on. If you're playing a video game, you know, you want to be able to see that enemy as soon as they move from behind cover or whatever. You want to be able to react as quickly as possible to whatever's going on screen. So you want to be at least 60 frames per second, and really fancy gaming, gaming setups are going all the way up to, say, 144 frames per second. If you shoot something that's meant for exhibition at a theater or something like that in a very high frame rate like that, it actually tends to disorient people a little bit. It feels like a little too smooth and a little too real, and can even cause motion sickness more easily in people who are susceptible to that. So so a super high frame rate, super large, is usually not a great idea. We are going to work in 30 frames per second, or technically 29.97 frames per second. That's kind of the default. And that's what these pieces of footage are. That's the frame rate that these pieces of footage that we're working with are using. So that will, so that's frame rates. So when I talk about frames, now you know what I mean. Okay. So let's go back let's go ahead and add in our shape here. I'm going to click up at the top in the little toolbar. There are a bunch of different tools up here. I'm going to click on the rectangle tool, or I can press the Q key on my keyboard. As with any Adobe program, After Effects is just swimming with keyboard shortcuts, and keyboard shortcuts are extremely useful in After Effects. So, so learning them is good. And in fact, if you go to the, if you head to the link that I provided at the beginning of class, that's Cal's, I believe, cals.link/AE class, cals.live/AE class, you can actually find a link to a keyboard shortcut cheat sheet that I found online. So, so you can check that out if you want to. Print it out, keep it next to your computer. It's a great thing to do. Okay, so I clicked up here. I've got this, the rectangle tool, and I'm going to come in here to the middle. I'm going to go ahead and just hold down and drag and get this in approximately the center. Now there's a whole fiddly thing about centering stuff in After Effects. After Effects isn't as heavy on what we call snapping, where things, where it's easy to get things exactly centered and stuff like that. After Effects isn't as heavy on snapping as some of the other Adobe tools. So we're not going to really worry about that today, but just know that maybe it's not exactly in the center, and if you want it in the center, you're gonna have to do a little more work, unfortunately. So we're not going to fiddle with that so much today. Okay, cool. So now I have my rectangle, and I also have here a shape layer just above the video, that trees video. Yours may be a different color when you create it. That's perfectly fine if it is. If you want to change the color, I think I'm going to stick with this gray for now. If you want to change the color, though, you can come up here and double click where it says fill. Oops, and you can either use the little eyedropper to pick a color, or you can mix your own color using these tools, whatever you choose. Like I said, I'm going to stick with the gray, but you can do whatever you want. Let's see. So someone just said, when I just drew my rectangle, it kept only the graphic within the rectangle and turned everything else black. Okay, so I guess I must have clicked somewhere to deselect. Go ahead, and if you get that result, go ahead and undo. You can either click edit and then undo whatever it says on there, or you can press Control Z if you're on a PC, or Command Z if you're on a Mac. What that did was that created a matte. We'll probably talk about those. Yeah, we'll talk about those a little bit later on. But yeah, sometimes if you have a piece of footage selected, it will, or excuse me, a mask, it will mask it out like that. And so what it did was it created the mask to essentially filter out everything around the rectangle. And then, so what you want to do to draw the rectangle so that you actually get a shape is you can click somewhere blank in the timeline and make sure, essentially right now I have the trees footage selected. Click outside there to make sure it's not shaded in anymore, it's not selected. Then go up here to the rectangle tool and draw the rectangle, and that should work. Let me know if that didn't work, or if you still ran into problems. Okay, cool. Good. All right. So, okay. So now I have two layers here, the shape layer and this video layer. The shape layer, or shape layers, can contain multiple shapes that are essentially grouped as one thing. So if I wanted to draw a whole complex shape that was made up of a lot of different geometry, I could do that in one shape layer, and that would work just fine. I'm not going to do that in this instance, but you could do that. The advantage to that, as opposed to creating multiple shape layers, one for each shape, is that you can move them around or animate them as all one thing, rather than worrying about doing it separately. But in this case, we're just going to do one shape, and it'll be perfectly fine because we've got plenty of stuff to cover. We're not going to dig into that necessarily. Okay, so now if I play my footage again, you'll notice, by the way, my little green bar has disappeared. That's because I made a change to the comp. So, when I make a change like that, it has to re-envision what my composition is going to look like. In this case, it didn't take long. It basically knew what it was supposed to look like. It just had to add a rectangle on top of every frame, and that's no big deal. Okay, so far so good. What I want to do now is I want to go ahead and create our first animation here. This rectangle is just going to separate it's just going to separate the text that I'm about to put on top of it from the rest of the composition. And so, so we don't have to do anything super fancy with it, but I do want to show you a few useful things. Okay, down here underneath where it says shape layer 1, if it just says shape layer 1 and it's not expanded like this, where you see contents rectangle 1 transform, then you can click on this little arrow next to this kind of color coding here. Click on that little arrow, and that'll expand it down. So you should see this. The next thing that you want to do is actually click this arrow next to transform. And that is going to give us the transform properties of this particular, well, it's the entire shape layer in this place, or in this case. You could modify just the rectangle itself, but in this case, modifying the shape layer and modifying the, and modifying just the rectangle are essentially the same thing. So we're not going to worry about that too much. Okay, underneath where it says transform, we have our properties. And I'm going to spend a moment on these because honestly, I do want to make sure that you know exactly what's going on there. One of the first, the first thing here that you'll see is the anchor point. The anchor point is basically this little crosshair thing right here in the middle of, middle-ish at least, of the rectangle. And basically what that is whatever object you're working with, the place that it's positioned is going to be the place that it's essentially its position, which we're about to talk about, is going to be affected by the location of its anchor point. Right now, if you look down here, our position is 960 and 540 here. What that means is the anchor point of this shape layer is in exactly the middle of the frame because it's 1080p footage, which means so all of your footage is made up of these little colored dots called pixels, right? It's just a grid of colored dots that can change colors and give you essentially the illusion of the image of an object. So whenever I take a picture of someone using a digital camera, the picture that I take is basically just a grid of pixels that have the appropriate colors to make it look as much as possible like that person's, like that person's face or whatever. And so, and if you zoom in far enough, you would see each of the individual pixels that make up the image. So the video layer here is made up of 1,920 columns of pixels going side to side here, and then 1,080 rows of pixels going from top to bottom. That's why we call regular high definition video 1080p. 1080 is essentially the height in pixels of the image. The P stands for progressive scan, which honestly is really not something you'll need to worry about much. Almost all video nowadays is in progressive scan as opposed to interlaced, just kind of an older thing. Don't worry about that so much. The P stands for progressive rather than pixel, as you might imagine, but that's okay. So in any case, that's the position of our anchor point. And then our anchor point in our overall layer is positioned at 0, 0. So if I change where the anchor point is, changing the positioning of my, then essentially changing the position down here will change where the anchor point is, and the rest of the layer moves along with it. Okay, so scale, essentially that's the size of the object. When this little chain link is clicked and shaded in, what that means is that, that you're going to be, if you change the scale in terms of width, you'll change the height also. And if you change the height, you'll change the width. So those two things are connected together. If you uncheck the little chain link, then you can modify the width and the height independent of one another. 100% basically means that it's shown at exactly the normal size. Excuse me. Underneath that is rotation. The rotation will basically give you, really, this is the only thing that you need to modify right here. After the X, that'll show you the number of degrees that something's rotated. So if I change this, either by clicking and typing in a number, so it's 5 degrees off, or I can actually move my mouse over it. You'll notice with almost any of these numbers here, if I move my mouse over them, there's a little hand with arrows pointing left and right. The arrows that are pointing left and right, I can bring my video back. The arrows, or the hand with the arrows pointing left and right, if you click on this, what it means is you can hold down and drag to change this value gradually. If you drag to the left, then you're going essentially down in number. If you drag to the right, then you're going up in number. And that way you can position, you can kind of see what's happening as you go. So you can kind of, you can just fiddle with it really easily if you're not sure exactly what value you're going for. Finally, we have our opacity. Again, I talked about that a moment ago up here when we were talking about the alpha channel. But your opacity is how transparent something is, or really how transparent it isn't. If your opacity is 100%, then the object, or the layer in this case, I guess I should say, is completely opaque. You can't see through it at all to whatever's below. If I slide that down to 0, then you can see through it entirely, and no one will even know that the rectangle is there when they see your final video. Somewhere in between is going to make it a little bit transparent, but also allow you to see some of the background through it. And that's actually what I want. I'm going to slide it down to, let's say, 66% here. That looks pretty good. So now if I deselect it, you'll see I've got just a little shaded box there. I can see the trees through it. That's no big deal, but I don't have to worry about my, I don't have to worry about losing my, so it looks, essentially, because it's a little bit transparent, it looks more like part of the overall picture rather than being, if it was completely opaque, it would look like there's a picture and then bonk, something's been plopped on top of it, essentially. So this kind of helps tie things together a little bit better. So I'm going to leave that at 66%, and then we will add our text. Actually, let's do one other thing with this. So 66% is where I want this to be for most of the composition. But I actually don't want this box to start out on screen. When somebody first starts watching the video, I want the rectangle to appear gradually there. To make that happen, I'm going to actually animate this opacity property here. So first things first, so 66% is what I want it to be ultimately. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little stopwatch right here. When I click on that, what I'm telling After Effects is I want this particular property of the image, or of the layer, I should say, to be animated. I want it to change over time. That's why if you mouse over this, they actually call this thing the time vary stopwatch. So this particular property of it can vary over time. When I do that, it of course turns blue to tell me, oh, okay, this thing's being animated. And over here on the side is a little diamond that represents what we call a keyframe. This is super duper important. It's something that is, no pun intended, key to understanding how After Effects works. So I've got my little, I've got the little diamond representing a keyframe there, and it's blue. So that's the frame that I'm on now. So I've got my little playhead there, and it's at 0. So this is the very first frame of my video. Playhead is at 0, and on this particular frame there, and this particular frame is a keyframe for the opacity. Right now, I'm telling After Effects, okay, when playback gets to this frame, the rectangle needs to be 66% opacity. It needs to be, you know, essentially it needs to be like 34% transparent. But I actually want it to be 0 because this is the beginning of the clip and I want it to kind of fade in. So I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna just slide over and bring this down to 0. Then I'm gonna go a few frames over. So I can either drag my playhead up here at the top, or what I generally do when I'm working with a pretty small amount of time is I can go frame by frame. If you're used to using Adobe Premiere, this is a little bit different and it takes some getting used to, particularly if you're switching back and forth between Premiere and After Effects constantly. You really have to think about it for just a second for a little while. The keyboard shortcut to get the keyboard shortcut to move frame by frame in After Effects, rather than being the left and right arrow keys, is Control. While you're holding Control, I think maybe it's Command on Mac. While you're holding Control or Command, you use the left and right arrow keys. So I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to go, say, I don't know, 5 frames to the right. So I'm going to hold Control while pressing the right arrow key 5 times. What that's going to do is that moves my playhead just a smidge. And you can see over here, I've got my time code right here. So I'm 5 frames in. And now what I want to do is change the opacity here to 66%. So I'll type that in. And when I do that, you'll notice my little keyframe button here turns blue, which tells me there's a keyframe here. I can use these arrow buttons next to the keyframe button to move between keyframes for this particular property. So now I'm on frame number 5, where it's 66% opaque. Now I'm back to the first frame of my video, where it's not opaque at all. It's 0% opacity or completely transparent. So, oh my goodness, there it goes again. You know what? We'll just do this. Okay, cool. So, so I've turned off I've got my keyframes. I've got my 2 keyframes here that I've set up, and now I just need to get them squared away to where, or now I can watch what I've made. So let's see. I'm going to drag my playhead back to the beginning, and I'll press space bar and let it play. All right, there we go. Okay, excellent. We've got it all set, and we're good to go. And I just turned off the green screen setting on Zoom, so we're going to a regular virtual background. Okay, so we've got that animated. We've created our first animation, which is great because keyframes are all over the place in After Effects. It's a very important concept, and we've done it. Now we have our video that fades slowly on screen. But it's actually not slow enough. So I'm going to adjust this a little bit. I'm going to move my mouse over this second keyframe, and I'm going to drag it out a little bit more. Put it like here. I don't know where that is exactly, but let's see. There we go. That's a little more subtle fade in. So yeah, that's a little nicer. And it so happens that that is frame number 21. All right, cool. So frame number 21, all set. Now let's add some text and finish up our first comp here. Okay, I'm going to go up to the top, and again, I'm going to choose a tool. This time it's the horizontal type tool. So I'll hit this T, move here into the little box. Click, and I'll start typing some text. So I'll just make it the word text. I've typed it in, but it's really hard to tell that I did anything because that gray color is also selected there. So I'm going to change it to something else. Let's see. Maybe I'll make it, well, okay. Let me show you specifically what I did here. I typed the word text, but I can't see it at this point. So what I'm going to do is select the text with my mouse by highlighting it. And then I'm going to come over here in the corner. Now I have this open, but if you don't, if you don't see the controls that I have, I've got my font size and the font style, or my font family and my font style here, two little color swatches. This is the character panel right here. If you don't have the character panel open, it's no big deal, super easy. All you need to do is go up to the top to the menu, click on Window, and then come down here and click Character in the menu, or right there, and that should open this character panel for you. Once you're in there, I'm going to double click on the little color swatch, and I'm going to change the color. Let's make it like a blue. By the way, you'll notice mine is showing up over here, like I can see exactly what it's going to look like before I lock it in. If yours is not showing up that way, all you need to do is check the box next to Preview right over here, and that should do it. No, that's pretty good. Okay, I'm going to settle for this text color, and now I'm going to make this a little larger too. So down here underneath, again, you do have to have the text selected in order to do this. So the easiest way to do that is just drag over it so it's shaded like that. If you have the little text cursor here and you start making changes, they'll only affect any text that you type after that. So you got to select the text that you want to affect before you make any of these changes. I'll slide this slider up a little bit, make my text larger. That seems like a decent size. Okay, cool. So I'll stick with that size for now. I chose this 271, and the font that I have is fine. It's called Laundrina Solid, and it's the black style. So I'm good with that. I'm going to come down here, and I'm just going to actually click in a blank area of the timeline down at the bottom. So that way everything's deselected. But now I actually need to move this a smidge. So I'm going to click where it says text. I now have a third layer. That's my text layer. I'm going to click where it says text there. And I'm going to come up here to the top and click on the selection tool, or I can press V as in Victor on my keyboard. And I'm going to bring this in and try to kind of center it over this rectangle. And that's fine. Okay, cool. So now I have that there. So that's looking good so far. But it still looks a little weird because the text stays on screen the whole time. And then even before my box is there to kind of separate it visually from the rest of the comp. So what I want to do is I want to give the text an entrance as well. For that, I'm going to animate its position. So I'm going to come over here on the left or down here in the timeline, click the little arrow to twirl down all my properties here, and I'm going to twirl down transform as well. Then I've got my position right here. Oh yeah, and I should probably put my playhead where I want it to be. So I definitely shouldn't have my text there until my until my box to separate it visually is fully in place. So I'm going to try to get to the frame where I actually hit that 66% opacity keyframe. Frame number 21, it turns out. Okay, so I'm right there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the little stopwatch next to position under my text layer right here. That's going to tell my text layer, okay, you know, I want you to change this, to change the position of this text. And then I have my X, so my horizontal position, and my Y, my vertical position right here. My vertical position is the one I want to change. I'm going to have my text kind of fall from the top. So, I'm going to go to my vertical position, and I'm just going to drag that backwards. As you go down in number on the Y position, the vertical position, you get closer and closer to the top. There we go. Okay, cool. So it's just off screen because my camera's not moving around or anything like that. This is a fine place to put it. So it's going to be here at negative 20.1, depending on what font and what size you use. That may be different for you. But mine's going to be at negative 20.1. And then I'm going to give it a few frames to fall into place. So here I am at 105. That seems like a good spot. So now I'm gonna change my vertical position again. And plop it down there. There we go. Okay, great. So that'll be my second keyframe right there. That tells it, hey, you know, you need to be in this point or at this spot by this point. One other thing to remember about this is it's super duper important to click the little stopwatch before you start trying to set up keyframes. If you don't click the little stopwatch beforehand, what'll happen is you're just changing the permanent position or opacity or scale or whatever for the whole length of the composition, as long as that thing is on the screen. So you want to make sure that you enable animation, you click the little stopwatch before you start trying to place keyframes, because otherwise they're not going to be keyframes. They're just going to be changes to that property that span the whole comp. Okay, so let's rewatch it and see what happens now. Okay, that's cool. That's not bad. But I want to make it a little more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a little kind of bounce. You could do this in a number of different ways, or at least a couple of different ways. But I want it to actually hit this point and then just up just a tiny smidge and then come back down. So I'm going to go, say, 3 frames forward. So again, I'm holding control and going 1, 2, 3. And let's make it 4. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I've gone 4 frames forward from my keyframe that I've got there. And so I actually want this to be its permanent sort of spot to rest. So what I'm going to do is make sure that this keyframe is selected where I get to that permanent spot, and I'm going to copy that keyframe. So, okay, yeah, you can't even do it. So I do have to use my keyboard to do this because it's not in the right-click menu. So here on a PC, I'm going to hold Control while pressing C. That's the keyboard shortcut for copy. On a Mac, it's Command C, same thing. And that doesn't just work in After Effects, that works in almost any program. So, you know, if you ever are like, I can't copy using right-click, you can pretty much always still copy using Control C or Command C. Okay, So I've copied the keyframe, and actually up in the corner, those of you watching on YouTube can't see it, but up in the corner here under the info panel, it actually says copied one keyframe to tell me that I successfully copied it. Now I'm gonna come over here, or now that since my playhead is a little bit further over, I'm gonna press Control V. V is in Victor, that's the keyboard shortcut for paste, Control V or Command V. And that's gonna paste that keyframe. So I have two identical keyframes that are 4 frames apart. And then I'm gonna go back a couple of keyframes in the middle here. Excuse me, and I'm going to add one more keyframe where we go take the number, the height or the Y number slightly down so that the text actually goes up. So now I have 3 keyframes. I can zoom in a little bit. I can either drag this little bar right here, or I can use the plus and minus keys on my keyboard. Either way works. But that'll allow me to kind of zoom in and get a closer view. So let's see. This is the keyframe where my text starts, and so it just stays up there through the beginning of the composition. Once my little rectangle fades into view, then my text is going to fall down until it hits this point, kind of the bottom of its fall. And then it'll bounce up a little bit and come back down. I might actually nudge this keyframe over. I'm just going to drag it using my mouse so that it goes up a little more slowly than it comes back down. So let's try that. Yeah, there we go. That's kind of nice. So it bounces, so that way it makes it look a little more alive. Like you're not just showing a PowerPoint presentation. The more of those little touches you can add to make things kind of more lively and feel a little more physical, the cooler your work in After Effects is gonna end up on screen for your audience. Okay, so we did it. That's our first composition. And oh yeah, one little tidying up thing that I will mention. It's not super duper important in this particular instance, but it is something to think about. One of the things with After Effects, one of the things that's super important when you're working in After Effects is thinking about how fast your computer is going to be able to export your stuff. Exporting is basically creating the final version of it that can be viewed in any video player rather than just in After Effects. Thinking about how fast things are going to be to export, and thinking about how much of your computer's RAM, the memory, kind of your computer's working memory, you're using at any given time. So one thing that you can do here, I'm actually going to shorten, like if I zoom, all the way out here, you can see the length of my whole composition, all 30 seconds of it. And you'll notice right here, this is the point at which the text actually needs to exist as far as my comp is concerned, this particular frame right here. So what I can do is I can actually shorten this little bar right here to say, essentially, you don't need to think about the text, or to tell my computer, essentially, you don't need to think about the text at all until you get to this point on the timeline. So to do that, I'm going to come to the edge of this red bar here, and I'm going to drag it inwards. And I can either try to line it up with my playhead, or I can hold Shift after I start dragging, and that's going to make it snap to things like the beginning and end of the comp and the playhead, or it'll snap to the beginnings and ends of other layers in my comp. So that's not going to do much for us really right now, but it is gonna, but thinking about stuff like that is really helpful when you're working in After Effects, and it's so it's worth mentioning it, and it's worth you considering. Okay, so we've got that particular comp done. It's looking good, and you know, we could do plenty more stuff with it, but let's move on to some other examples. Before we do that, are there any questions? If you're in Zoom, use the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, the chat is probably going to be over to the right of the video. Yeah, it's over to the right. So shoot me any questions you have really quick, and then we'll dive into the next example. Actually, I'm going to step over and get my water really quick because I don't want my voice to go out on y'all, and then we'll move to the next one after any questions. All right, I don't see any questions, so let's go ahead and dive into the next one. So the next example that we're going to work on is going to be a tracking example, and basically tracking is a technique where you can do a lot of different things. One of the most common uses for tracking is replacing screens. So usually when you're working with, you know, if I'm on a film set and my characters are using, say, a smartphone or something, excuse me, the not only the frame rate, but actually the timing of when each frame shows up on the screen. If I want it to come across without flickering in the final version of the video, I need that timing to be exactly the same. I need for my camera, when it's capturing each frame of my video, I need there to be a full frame on the screen that my actors and so forth are using. And if they're using real software, then that's fine. You know, then that would work out nicely. If they're not using real software, if I want to kind of fake the screen somehow, or if they're using like future software or whatever, then instead of syncing that up, what I'm probably going to do is just replace the screen that they're looking at in some software. Another thing is keeping track of stuff. So on screen. So for example, if you watch sports, sometimes they use little techniques to point out exactly where the ball or the puck or whatever is, out there. And so tracking in video allows us to do that automatically without having to go into each frame and say, okay, in this frame it's here, and in this frame it's here, and in this frame it's here. So let's do some tracking. Okay, first of all, again, remember we're working with we're trying to conserve the memory on our computer and keep it from having to do extra work that it doesn't need to. So I'm going to close this trees comp. So I'm going to click the little X over here and close that out. And that way, oops, that's not really what I wanted. Okay, well, bizarre. Okay, I'm going to click on reset to save layout. Thank you very much. Okay, good. Okay, well, let's just leave it for now and then we'll close it in a second. So, all right, so I'm gonna need to import more footage. So I'm gonna go up here at the top, click import and do file. And I'm already inside of my example files, but I'm in the backgrounds area. I'm going to click back up where it says AE example files. And I'm going to go to this toy footage folder. And I'm looking for this one called helicopter shot, helicoptershot.mp4. I'm going to double click on that. And that, excuse me, gives me, that creates a new comp for me, helicopter shot right here. And it gives me, and it also imports the footage itself. So I could reuse it in other comps if I want to, or duplicate it or whatever. Okay, so now that that's open, I am going to come over here and click the X next to trees. That way that's all closed up. By the way, if you lost your timeline altogether or things went a little weird, you can do what I did a second ago. Go up to the top where it says standard. That's your standard layout. Click on the 3 lines next to that and click reset to saved layout, and that will put it back to the default view, essentially. The default workspace is what they call it. Okay, so we have this shot, and it's essentially, I shot this on the dining room table. It's essentially just a little helicopter shot of some toys, and it's kind of slowly sort of panning around, excuse me, until it gets behind this dinosaur, and then everything, and then that's the end of the shot, basically. So so that's kind of fun. We've got that. What I want to do is I want to have a little label on the fish here, and just make it say fish. So first, I'm going to come up and I'll go ahead and put my text here. So I'm going to click on the little T for the horizontal type tool and come to the middle, click on, oh, my character panel has moved. That's okay. Click in the middle there somewhere and just type fish. That's too large, so I'm going to scale it down a bit. Yeah, that's pretty good. Click. I'll click down here at the bottom in a blank area of the timeline to deselect. So now I can see how it's looking. That's okay. If we wanted to be a little more fancy, we could put something behind it to separate it visually, or we could go with a different color. White might actually work best for that. Let's see. There we go. Let's try that. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so white is good for this. Okay, so I need to move this a little bit. So I'm going to press V on the keyboard or click the little arrow up here for the selection tool. And I'll just click here and drag it a smidge so that it is, so it's where I want it to be. And then I'm going to come up here and do a little, yeah, we'll just do the little, I'm going to click on the pen tool up here. We'll draw a little line. So I'm going to bring the pen tool. Let's see. We're going to start. I need to start at the first frame for this, I should say. So I was watching some of it and I ended up here. I'm going to drag this. I'm going to start at the first frame and go from there. So if you're not at the first frame, go ahead and drag your playhead until it gets there. And I'll reposition. And now I'll go for the pen tool. Okay, cool. So I'm going to point to the fish's eye here, or I'm going to, oops, undo that. Okay, I'm going to click with the pen tool on the fish's eye for reasons that will become apparent shortly. And then I'm going to click down here next to the word fish. That draws a little line. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I can use the scroll wheel to do this. That's super easy. And where is it? You know what? I decided to do the pen tool on a whim. I'm not super good with the pen tool because it's kind of weird, but and I haven't had a ton of practice with it. So I'm going to go ahead and undo both of those things. And I'll go ahead and grab the brush tool right here. Click on the brush tool. Okay, I'm painting in white. And I'm going to come down here and oh, there we go. My brush tip preview. I want to make the hardness 100% so that I'm getting a nice clean line here. And now I'll come in and just, oops. Okay, yeah. All right, so it's giving me a little error message. It's saying I need to do it in a layer panel. So I can't do it on the whole comp itself. I need to do it, I need to go into the layer. To do that, all I need to do is come down here and double click on the name of the layer, helicoptershot.mp4. If I double click on that, it opens up the layer in my, nope. Okay, so sorry, y'all. I drew a shape last time and it did not turn out well, so I'm trying to figure out a different way to do this. Okay, let's go back here. All right, I'm gonna actually add a, I am just gonna do the shape, it's no big deal. Okay, I'm gonna hold down on the rectangle tool that well, first of all, I'm gonna click so that none of my layers are selected. I'm gonna hold down on the rectangle tool that we used before, and I'm gonna choose the polygon tool right here. Or no, let's do the rectangle tool, that'll work. Okay, so I've chosen the rectangle tool. I'm gonna come in here and I'm just gonna make a super small rectangle, which conveniently looks a lot like a line. There we go. I'm gonna change the fill color to white. The easiest way to do that down here in this hex code area, I'm just gonna type FFFF, six Fs, whatever that is. There we go, so now that's white. And now I can just click on this. I'll rotate it a little. There we go, beautiful. Okay, so now we have a line that's pointing to the fish and we're good to go. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do is we need to essentially attach these two things together. If you've used, say, Photoshop or even things like PowerPoint, you know that in some of those tools you can group things. That's not exactly how it works in After Effects, even though sometimes I wish it was. Instead, excuse me, in After Effects, what you want to do is give each object give the set of objects that you want to move together a parent object. So let me show you how that works. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the top and click the layer menu, the very top of After Effects. Then I'm going to come down here where it says new. Whoops. Slide over, and I'm going to choose null object. A null object is basically an object that's not actually going to appear on screen, but it gives you kind of something to work with. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, So now we have this object that's just called null1. I'm going to call it, whoops, I accidentally double clicked on that and opened up a layer panel for that. I don't want that. I'm going to click the X up here. So the null object, I'll right click and I'll click rename. And I'm going to call this like label movement. Or maybe actually fish label movement, because presumably I might want to label other objects on the screen as well. In this case, we're just dealing with the fish though. So fish label movement, there we go. And now what I'm going to do is take the shape layer that has my little rectangle line and make the fish label movement a parent of that by clicking this little drop-down arrow or drop-down menu right here. On yours, it'll probably say none, but you click on that and click fish label movement. And then the word fish, same thing. I'm going to click there and I'll click fish label movement again. There we go. Okay, so now the fish label movement null object is considered to be the parent of the others. So if I make the null object move, then the other two objects will move along with it because it is their parent. You'll see what I mean here shortly. So, well, actually, let me just show you manually, and then we'll do the real thing that we came here to do. So right now, I don't have any movement or animation associated with those. So when let me zoom out a little bit. By the way, down here at the bottom of your composition preview, there are a few settings that are worth paying attention to. If you're working in 3D, you can actually change, which is a whole other thing that we're definitely not getting into today. You can actually change where you can actually add multiple views so you can see things from different sides. That's pretty cool. You can also down here at the bottom where it says, where mine says quarter, yours may say auto, full, or something else. I have mine set to quarter. What that does is it creates previews of my video in 1/4 of the resolution of the video. So it's not going to look as nice. You'll notice if I use the scroll wheel and zoom in, it looks pretty pixelated overall. But that makes it a lot easier on my computer to play things back quickly. And it uses less of my computer's memory, the RAM, to store a long preview section of my composition. So I usually leave mine on quarter, and then over here is your zoom. Right now mine says 100%, but I usually put it on fit so I can see the whole composition, at once. It basically makes it fit inside of the amount of space that I have. So if I play this back right now, you'll notice this just stays put and obviously doesn't stick with the fish. That's what we want to fix using tracking. But like I said, we're going to reposition the null object to do that. Now that the null object is the parent of the word fish and the little line here, if I move the null object, if I change the position, see, both of those move along with the null object. And that little red box there, that's the null object. It won't actually show up on screen in the real video, but that's technically that's the position of it. And the little crosshairs are the anchor point for it. So I'll undo that. There we go. This null object along with the position of the fish. Okay, so let's make that happen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and, I'm going to go to my, let's see, and I'll select that fish label movement. And I'll go up to the window area and I'll click on tracker. what that does is down here in the bottom corner, that gives me this is where I'm going to set up my tracking so that I can see exactly, or so that I can keep the label pointing to the fish. Okay, so I need to though switch my target. So I need to actually click on the helicopter shot.mp4 down here. And then these buttons light up: track camera, warp stabilizer, track motion, or stabilize motion. The warp stabilizer, we're not going to do this, but it is useful if you are, if you have kind of a shot that's sort of shaky, you can use that to stabilize the shot after the fact. It's pretty cool. Since it is, or in order to do that, what it's going to do is reposition your video frame by frame, and it'll probably zoom in on it a little bit. So if your camera is kind of sideways and it should be straight, then what it's going to do is zoom in on it a little bit and then twist it so that you don't have any gap areas, but the footage is straight. But what that's going to mean is it will cut out some, you won't get as much detail in your footage. So you do want to be careful with that, but it's pretty cool if you've got a shaky shot that you need to stabilize. So that's handy. But let's go ahead, and what I want is to track motion. So I'm going to click the track motion button. My motion source, it should say helicopter shot because that's what I have selected. And all of this stuff. And then down here, so you have a bunch of different types of tracking. We're not going to really get into that. It says track type. You could do stabilize, transform, parallel corner pin, perspective corner pin, or raw. So a lot of these, the parallel corner pin and perspective corner pin, those are for like the screen replacement type stuff that I mentioned before and things like that. Excuse me, down here, there's position, rotation, and scale. Position is what we're tracking in this case. So we just have a flat label that we want to stay pointing at the fish rather than moving all around. That's what we're looking for. Rotation and scale is if you're working with something that's 3D and you want to make sure that it stays completely in the same spot in 3D space as well. We're not going to get that fancy today though. Okay, so now what we need to do, you'll notice this has popped up here in the middle of our screen. By the way, we've opened up another layer preview panel here. So it says track point 1, and then it has these boxes. So what I want to do is I want to start out by going to the edge of this outer box. We're going to talk about what the boxes are in just a second. But I'm going to start by going to the edge of the outer box, and you'll notice I have my mouse pointer and then a little rectangle next to it. While I've got that, I'm going to hold down on my mouse. Nope, excuse me, the opposite of that. So I'll undo that. What I actually want to do is go into the middle. No, okay, there we go. Okay, cool. So actually go into the middle of go inside the larger box. Let's drag that around a little bit. What I want to do is position it so that you'll notice I get this little like pop-up kind of magnifier window almost. I want to position that over the fish's eye, like that. When I drop it in there, I've got the little crosshair. This little thing points right into the point of the fish's eye. And I'm going to drag this around until I have essentially the whole eye inside of this larger box. And we'll talk about what these boxes are in just a second. If I need to resize it, I'm going to come in here and just drag one of these corners, and that'll kind of resize the whole thing. And if I want to reposition just the crosshair, I can do that. I got to be honest with you, these controls are a little fiddly, but it's worth it. This is really helpful. And then I'm probably going to make this box just a smidge bigger, not a ton, but just a smidge like that. Okay, cool. So let's talk about what these three things are. In the middle, we have the point that we're tracking. So it's literally just looking at a pixel or a few pixels. You're trying to get it. What you're doing is you are, when you do this type of tracking, where it says track motion, this is called point tracking. So you're literally finding a particular point inside your video footage, and you are tracking that point's movement from frame to frame. So I'm placing my point right here in the middle. That's the little crosshair. The inner box here, this is the feature selection box. So the feature selection basically says, okay, there's a point, but the point is part of a feature of the object that we're trying to track. So in this case, the feature is the fish's eye. So we're keeping track of the fish's eye as we continue to move forward through the video. And finally, this right here is the search area. So this larger box is basically, in this frame, the eye is here. But in the next frame, where is it? This box gives us essentially a radius in which to search for the object that we're trying to track, in this case, or for the feature that we're trying to track, in this case, the fish's eye. So this box says, well, you know, throughout the video, it's basically not going to move more than this much from, you know, from its previous position. So that is pretty good. One key thing about this is you don't want to make the feature too large. So I wouldn't want to make it the whole fish, because that would be that would be a little bit overkill. And I definitely don't want to make this search area too large. The search area and the feature box are going to move along with the tracked point each frame. And so as long as the fish's eye doesn't move more than this much in any consecutive, you know, in any two consecutive frames, then After Effects should be able to find the eye just fine. The larger I make this outer rectangle, the slower my tracking is gonna go. The harder it's gonna be on my computer, and the longer I'm gonna have to wait. So keeping those things as small as you can reasonably is a really good thing to do. Okay, so let's make it happen. I'm gonna come down here back into my tracker panel that popped up down here when I opened it, and I'm gonna hit this little Analyze Forward button right here. I do have the option to analyze frame by frame by going click, 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 but I don't want to do that. I'm going to let it try on its own. So I'll just click this little one, third from the left or second from the right, and it's going to start trying to track it. It's going to go through the footage, and it's going to keep an eye on, no pun intended, the fish's eye, so that I can tell what's going on. Whoops. Okay, I used the scroll wheel and it did not like that. Okay, I'm going to stop it and have it try again, because this does not seem to be working. Okay. Back. Try again. And I am going to zoom out a smidge so that I can follow this. Here we go. So for each frame, it's looking through and saying, okay, where's the eye now? Where's the eye now? And it's actually creating individual sort of keyframes that show where the eye is as it's analyzing. So we go up. So far, so good. Since it's a fairly slow moving shot, my my search radius could be pretty small without affecting the quality of the tracking. Okay, that's probably good. I'm not going to make us sit here for the full 30 some odd seconds of footage. That's perfectly fine. So, okay, you'll see for each frame, we got a snapshot of the position of the fish's eye. And so now, so we can kind of see where those are as we move through this. Now what I'm going to do is I'll click apply down here. It says apply dimensions X and Y. Okay, whoops. Undo. Sorry about that. Okay, so okay, so I've got to come back down here under the tracker, make sure under motion source, I'm going to click helicopter shot. And I've got all this. And then I need to click edit target right here at the bottom. I forgot about that. So it says apply motion to layer 1, fish label movement. Oh, that's correct. Okay, cool. So I have to make sure the right thing is selected. I'll click OK. And then I'm going to click apply. Now I have apply dimensions X and Y, X only or Y only. Excuse me. So what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to move my tracking, or if I only care about the horizontal movement, then I'll say apply dimensions Y or X only. If I only care about the vertical movement, then apply dimensions Y only. But in this case, I care about both. So I'm going to choose X and Y. Now click OK. And now it's moved to a weird spot. So I need to reposition my fish label movement again. So I'll just come down here under position and drag it to the right spot. Maybe I'll zoom in a smidge so that way I can make sure I'm looking in exactly the right place. So I'm using the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. One other thing that I can do that's really useful, since the area that I'm interested in is just outside my view right now, but I still want to be zoomed in, I can use the hand tool up here. I can click on the hand tool to switch to it, or press H to switch to it. But I can also just hold down my space bar on my keyboard. And that will temporarily, while I'm holding down space bar, that will temporarily switch to the hand tool. So that way I don't have to worry about, switching back to the tool that I need later on. So now I'll get in the right spot, and then I'll let go of space bar and the mouse button, and I'm there. Okay, let's see. I'll change my X position just slightly, just a little bit, and I'll change the Y position just a little bit too. Okay, there we go. So now my fish is correctly labeled, and now nope. Okay. That was not the right way to do this. So I need to undo change value until I get, there we go. That's back the way it was. No, I need to get it exactly the way it was. Okay, undo apply motion tracker. So that's all been undone. What I need to do, rather than change the position of my fish label movement, I need to actually change the anchor point. Because by moving the anchor point of the object I can get where I'm pointing correctly to the eye. While preserving the movement that the keyframes already have there. Okay, cool. So that's been changed. So now when I watch my footage, it tracks along with the fish. And now, since we've gotten to the end of where it's tracked, it goes off, but that's okay. So that's tracking. It's a really useful thing that you can, that you may need in certain circumstances, and something very useful that After Effects can do. Are there any questions about that? I'll give us just a moment to check for questions, and then we'll dive into our last example here. I think we got it. All right, so let's dive into the last example. In our last example, we're going to do some green screen work. Green screen is a really useful thing. And I mentioned compositing. That's one of the most common types of compositing in video work. A lot of times you'll shoot footage in front of a green screen, and then essentially you'll replace the background with whatever you want the normal, with whatever you want the background to actually be. The reason you use a green screen is that it's essentially that bright green color that's not found in a whole lot of places in nature, and it's not found in a whole lot of people's clothes and things like that. And so you're not super duper likely to have other things that are that green in the shot that would make it more difficult to use. And of course, if you're using a green screen and if you know you're going to use a green screen beforehand, you definitely want to avoid that color of green, generally speaking, so that you don't have problems. Okay, let's go ahead and get in there. I'm going to import some more footage here. So I'll click, I will go to File, Import File, and I'm going to click back into my example files folder and double click on the backgrounds area there. And I've got a number of different background options that I can choose from. There are trees, there's a swing, there's something that was shot in my side yard here at the house. There are bricks with some leaves. There are bricks that are kind of colored in, and there's a birdhouse. I'm going to choose the bricks with color this time. So I'll click that, click import. And now we have this brick wall with this chalk coloring on it. You can also see over here on the side it says, or we've actually created another comp, our last comp for the day, which is bricks color. And my helicopter shot one is still open too. I'm going to click the X to close that out, so that way my computer doesn't have to use any of its resources thinking about that comp while I'm working on this one. Okay, so we've got this background, and now what we need to do is I want to take my green screen footage and put it on top, and then make it so that you can see through the background there. My green screen footage is another thing I'm going to import, so I'll go File, Import, File, and then back in my example files, there's greenscreen.mp4. I'll import that. And it created another comp for me with that, but I actually don't want that. So I'm going to close that out. I could also just kind of an easier way to approach this would be to drag that green screen footage directly on there. Whoops. To drag the green screen footage from my file explorer in Windows directly into the timeline. That also works quite well, and it'll show up in your imported thing as well. I'm going to come down, well, I'm going to delete this green screen comp because I don't need it. Click on it and press delete with my keyboard. There we go. And I'm going to get just the footage and drag that down on top of Brick's color.mp4. So now I have two different pieces of video footage. If I watch this, of course, I can still hear the background, but I have the background sound from the lower piece of footage, but it's completely blocked, so I can't see it at all. I can only see the green screen portion of it. Cool. There we go. So now, and oh, you'll notice my playback resolution is switched back to full. I'm gonna switch to auto again, or to quarter again, so that way it makes it a little easier as far as playback goes. Okay, cool. So we're watching that, but obviously we need to be able to see through the green screen and find see the footage underneath. So let's make it happen. First of all, I'm gonna, what I need to do here is I need to apply an effect to this green screen footage in order to make the green screen portions of it transparent. To do that, I'm going to come over here where I showed you earlier. And in this sidebar in the middle, I've got libraries, brushes now, and then this arrow. I'm going to click on the arrow and I'm looking for effects and presets. Another way to do that would be to come up here to the window menu and click effects and presets in there. Once I've got that, I've got this whole list of categories of effects and presets. I'm going to click in the search bar and I'm going to search for key light. Key light is the name of the main green screen keying effect in After Effects. So I'm going to take this key light effect and I'm going to drag it on top of greenscreen.mp4 in my timeline. When I do, you'll see, oh, okay, we've got that. And nothing's happened so far, but that's okay because I haven't set this up yet. Okay, I'm going to come over here where it says screen color. This is my first thing that I need to work with. Although actually I am going to, I do want to change this view slightly. I'm going to come over here, rather than final result, I'm going to click intermediate result right here. And that's going to give me, that's actually going to help me there are some additional effects like some color changes and things like that that happen at the very end. I don't want to see those right now. What I want to do is essentially I want to get as close as possible to no green on the outside and all the color here on the inside. So this will help me kind of see what's happening there. I'm going to come down here and click on the little eyedropper next to screen color, and I'm going to click some of the green. And that will hide my, and that will get rid of a lot of the green screen already. So it's looking not bad, honestly, just from the outset. But I probably need to tweak some things here. There's the screen gain and screen balance. Those are probably the two primary settings that you want to play with in order to get your key looking a little bit nicer. So I'm going to try sliding these. If I go too far down on screen gain, I get some green in the background. So that's not too great. If I go up a little bit on screen gain, that's actually looking better. You'll notice there was kind of a green halo around a lot of my stuff, and it actually goes away when I turn the screen gain up. And now if I try screen balance, let's slide that around a little bit. If I play with that a smidge, basically if I go too high, you'll notice my lion over here on the left starts to sort of disappear. And if I go too low, then the raccoon starts to disappear. So I don't want either of those things. I'm basically just going to leave this at 50, which is the default. And that's okay, but it still doesn't look great. Both my lion and my raccoon are a little bit transparent, and I'm not crazy about that. So beyond that, let's see. So, I mean, this is looking okay. We can watch it. We can see what's happening. You know, the background is there, but it's not exactly the way we would want it to be. So I need to add some additional effects to this to adjust it further. The next one that I want to add, so we basically have there are two different areas where we have effects that are related to doing these composites like this. The first one is keying, obviously. So key light is our main effect, and then there are some other ones that we'll talk about in a sec. In addition to that, there's the matte area here. Now, a matte is basically when you have an area that's sort of cut out in your video, and so we want to. So we're gonna play with this as well. The one that I want in this case is refine hard matte. So I'm gonna drag this over, and I'm gonna drop it on the left-hand side here underneath the key light effect. So you'll have, and you can expand and collapse these as you need to. So key light is here, and then refine hard matte. The order that these are in matters. Whatever's on top, that effect is going to be the first thing that's added that's going to be the first thing that's done to your video. And then then what's below that is going to be the second thing that's done to your video. What's below that is going to be the third thing, and so on. So if you have effects that you need to add, if you have multiple effects that you need to add, and things are not looking quite right, you may need to shuffle them around a little bit to get them to be in exactly the order you want them. Okay, so I'll just hide the key light for now, and we'll focus on refine hard matte. Okay, so this is going to be, let's see. So we'll need to do, essentially what this is doing is saying, so before, if I turn this off, see the chicken's kind of transparent here, or let's do the lion and the raccoon. See the lion and the raccoon, you can see the bricks through them right here. And so if I turn refine hard matte on, what it's trying to do is it's trying to find areas that are together inside my video. A hard matte is basically a shape that has hard edges to it. A soft matte over here is going to be a shape with softer edges. So something like, for example, someone with a lot of hair that's going every which way, things like that. And where you want those individual strands of hair to show through. That's one of the hardest parts of using green screens and things like that is those little individual hairs. Like, you know, you can very clearly see those on video, but it's really hard to see them. But the computer has a hard time distinguishing between the green screen background and those little individual strands of hair, or getting that exactly right. So if you have something with less defined edges than toys and fingers, then you may try this refine soft matte instead. We still have a few problems here. For one thing, you can kind of see through the raccoon's legs here, and it sort of cuts into it a little bit. It's not giving me a just wonderful shape. So I'm going to try to adjust this a little bit. So we can try to feather things. If we do that, gives us a little more, it gives us a little bit of a softer edge for some stuff. Some of the things that it thinks might be part of it, it will sort of show through more or less strongly. Essentially, it works the edges. Our contrast, we can adjust. Shift edge, that'll essentially just like take the edges of our stuff and kind of like push it outward a little bit. Okay, so that's actually working pretty well. Reduce chatter, we can probably crank that up too, because these are toys and fingers, and they don't, there's not a whole lot of, there aren't a whole lot of weird little bits on the edges. And then decontaminate edge colors. Basically, if you check that, it'll essentially try to find the green and like ungreenify it. Excuse me. All right, let's see what else. So that's looking okay, but it's still not perfect. We might also use the key cleaner. The key cleaner is going to basically just try and find all the little rough spots of our keying and smooth them out. So additional edge radius, I can adjust that. By default, it's 10 pixels, but I could bring that down if I want to. Honestly, that's looking pretty good. And I can change the strength of this. Nope, it's looking very nice, actually. Okay, cool. So that helped quite a bit. We finally got that bit of the raccoon's leg squared away. We do still have some green around the edges. So I'm going to add in the advanced spill suppressor here. Spill, again, is that extra green light that's kind of coming, that green cast that's added to our objects when we're in front of the green screen, because of course light always travels in a straight line, but it also bounces a lot. And so the spill suppressor basically tries to take that green cast out of your objects. Okay, so it looks really good there. But I noticed earlier, for some reason, we get a lot more green right here. And then there's a frame where it just shifts and looks really nice rather than very bad. So let's find that frame. Because of the way this spill suppression works, at some point toward the beginning, it must think that the toys have somewhat of a green color to them. But then right here, it actually changes the real colors. So I'm actually going to animate this stuff right here. I'm going to change the method here. I'm going to click on this little stopwatch. The method is going to be standard, starting with this frame, 20 seconds in exactly. But then, well, nope, starting with this frame, I guess. I'll show you a quick trick. If I want to see that keyframe where I made that change and move it back, I can click down here in the timeline and press U on my keyboard. That's going to show me all of the properties of my layers that have keyframes attached to them. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to move this keyframe back. By the way, I used the plus sign on my keyboard to zoom in on the timeline there, just in case you forgot from earlier. And here's the frame where it's So I want to actually switch this one to Ultra. In the Ultra, I could change the settings if I want to, but it actually looks really good. So I have the Ultra spill suppression up until this point, and then on this frame, it switches over just to the standard, which seems to work fine for the rest of the footage. Go figure. If I wanted to, I could refine this a little bit further. If I don't want it to look quite so blue, I could add some color correction to this and make it look a little nicer. But I don't necessarily need to do that. I'll zoom out and I'll let it play through the footage one more time, and we'll just see how everything's looking. So when I hit spacebar, it starts playing back. Of course, the toys aren't on screen for a moment here. You'll notice this little red bar is moving along. That tells me where I am in playback. Up here at the top, I'll have to turn my video off for just a moment. But up here at the top, you can see the frame rate that it's playing back. Right now, it's only playing back at a little under 3 frames per second. So it's not doing a great job of keeping up with it and playing it back in real time. That's okay though. You know, we're getting a preview, and honestly, this allows us to, while it's thinking about it, this allows us to be a little more analytical. It looks like we might have to do some work with where there's a little bit stronger motion. So we might adjust that. You know, we might have to adjust our key a little bit more in order to make everything look right when there's a lot of movement. You'll notice as our red thing moves along, we get we get the green bar here. If I were to stop playback right now, excuse me, then all of this is green because this footage has been figured out. And so if I play it now, it's going to play the portion that was green in real time, because that part of the shot is already stored in my computer's memory. Once it hits the end of that green, though, it starts slowing down again. So depending on how much RAM your computer has and depending on how fast it is, as far as the processor, as far as the graphics card and things like that, you know, your results may vary essentially as far as how fast or slow this goes. Also, if you're not doing live stream video at the same time, that might also affect the ability of things to go faster or slower. In any case, you know, this is not perfect, but if I were doing this for real, I'd spend a little bit more time and get into the details of it a bit more so that it looks really, really good for my final audience. But that gives you a taste of how to do green screen compositing in After Effects. And that's pretty much it for the class. Are there any questions before we wrap it up? All right, cool. Well, thank you so much. I hope y'all have a great rest of the day. I hope you've enjoyed this and got something out of it. And, you know, take a look at the library's website to find out about more live classes that are coming up soon. And I'll hopefully see you next time. Bye.